How's it? Welcome back. So, since our latest alcohol lockdowns, I've been brewing beer almost every single week. So that once the first batch is ready, I will have a new batch of beer ready every single week after that. So I can have a constant supply for as long as this is going to go on. But what I've always done when I've brewed beer is had to do it in two batches. And that's because I just don't have big enough equipment to brew all of it at once. Now, there's two stages where I need a lot of volume. And the first stage is the mash, where I need to soak all my malt, and the second stage is the boil. Now the boil stage requires me to get a much bigger pot. I don't know if it'll fit on my stove, I don't even know if it'll work. But what I can do is solve my mash stage now. So one of the simplest things I can do is do my mash at once. That's something very achievable, and I can do that by building a mash tun. And I'm going to do that out of this cooler box. Now when you mash, all you really have to do is keep water at a pretty constant temperature while your grains soak and all the sugars and the proteins are released, and then afterwards you want to be able to pull that liquid out of your container, your mash tun, and leave all the grain and all the malt behind, because you don't want that when you start to boil your beer. So to do that, I've got a cooler box, I've got this little tap that I bought. These are quite inexpensive, and then I need some way to keep the mash or the malt out of the liquid that I'm drawing out of my tun. And to do that, I've got this. Now this is just a normal flexible braided hose connector. Normally it's used for connecting a tap or a toilet or whatever to where the water comes out to where it needs to go. And this is cool because it's a stainless steel mesh, and inside there's a rubber tube, obviously to keep the water in. Now we don't want that, so what I'm going to try and do is cut the end of this guy and remove that rubber tube. And then we ended up with a pretty nice filter. Pretty inexpensive, pretty simple, available all over the place, and it's stainless steel, which is great. Now I've got two plans. Firstly, I'm going to cut the end off here. I bought the cheapest one there was. It just happened to have this end on that fits directly into like a mixer. I'm going to cut that off, and I'm going to see if I can remove the rubber. If I can't remove the rubber, I'm going to then cut the other end off as well. I wanted to try and avoid that because I've also got this compression reducer. So it's a 3/4 to 15mm reducer. And if I can use this fitting as is, this just screws nicely on here, and that would be the ideal situation, because then this screws into this side, and then I've got a nice little connection like that. If I can't get that right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this end off, I'm going to pull that piece of rubber out, and then I'm going to use the compression fitting. I'm going to use the little ring. I'm going to wrap my mesh back over the ring, and then I'm going to use the compression fitting to fit it onto here. So either way it's going to work out. Preferably I want to use this. If that doesn't work, that's fine. I'll use some sort of a MacGyver situation with this. What's important is you want to be able to disassemble it and remove it so you can make sure it's clean, and you don't want to build up any sort of horrible stuff in your mash tun if there's dirt sitting in the thread or anything like that. So we just want to be able to make it strippable and cleanable. So what I'm going to do to install this tap is I'm going to drill a hole in the side of my cooler box. Now I've already measured this cooler box. I measured the outside and the inside, so I know how much insulation is the bottom, and I've got an idea of where the tap's going to stick on the side. But what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to drill the hole on the inside first, so that I can fit this little nut on the inside to keep the tap in place, and then where it comes out to outside, that doesn't really matter. But importantly, what I'm going to do is, because this is quite short compared to the thickness of the cooler box, is I'm going to drill the inside hole at 28mm, big enough for this thread, and then I'm going to drill the hole in the outside layer at 44mm, so that this tap fits in, and I actually only make a connection against the inside skin of the cooler box, and that will ensure that I get a much better watertight connection. So I'm going to mark this out, and we're going to drill those holes. So that was pretty easy. I've drilled the hole on the inside and the outside. I put the little tap in, rubber seal on the inside. I think it's the right way around to do it. It makes more sense. And filled it up with water, no leaks. So that's part's done, which is cool. And now I'm going to make the little braided connector. You might notice that this is sticking a little bit further down than the the bottom of the cooler box. And the reason I did that, I know it's going to be a problem, but I can also remove it or turn it for storage, so it's not a problem. And I wanted to get the outlet as close to the bottom as possible, because I want to get as much of our wort or wort out of the mash as I can, so I can maximize my beer production. Now the next thing I want to try and do is cut the end of this. So I'm just going to use a hacksaw, clamp it on, and just cut the end off and see what we can do about getting that rubber tube out of here. Okay, cool. Well, that came off pretty easy. Don't need that. Now just be careful, this gets pretty burred on the edge, but we're going to use that to our advantage later to try and close off the edge here. So the next thing I'm going to try and do is get this rubber pipe out. So what I'm trying to do here is just kind of create a weak point at the top here, and this rubber is pretty, it's not brittle, but it does break apart. So it seems to be working so far. I just have to keep on doing this, hopefully make a weak patch just at this end. So I got quite a long piece of this tubing out, but not quite the whole thing. Now, I think I do want to try and get all the rubber out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just see if my fitting idea is going to work on this end before I cut this end off and try and maybe get the rubber out another way. Let me see if I can make this idea work. Okay, so it isn't perfect, but it actually works quite well. You don't really need this connection to be watertight because you want the liquid to actually flow through here and then out your outlet side. So this is gripping it in here nicely, and there's no gaps, so this should work well. So you can see what the idea is. Basically, we've got now this braided hose, and this braided hose has got lots of little holes in it, and all the liquid should drain through the hose, out the outlet, and then we can use that to boil. So I'm going to cut this end off as well. Pull out this little piece of rubber pipe that's left, and then I'm going to close this guy up. Cool. And there we go. One new stainless steel filter. So I'm just going to bunch this up again so I don't have this weave so tight. You want it to be a pretty fine filter, but also you need to remember that the grains or the malt is pretty big, so it has to be pretty small to go through here. In that case, it's going to be okay, because then you're going to get it out at a later stage during your process. So that, I think, is going to work well. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to clean up this end a bit, clamp it off with a pair of pliers, and then this should be ready. Just be really careful. These little strands are like little needles, and they go into your skin super easy. I think that, as it is sufficient. So now what we're going to do is just clean everything up. You can see my hands are pretty dirty. I'm going to wash everything nicely. I'm going to wash this fitting, I'm going to wash this guy, rinse it out, and then we can install it in the cooler box, and then we can make some beer. So this is what we've ended up with. We've got our improvised little filter at the bottom. I filled this up with water for quite a while. I left it in there. There was no discoloration. It tasted fine afterwards. So I'm pretty happy that we cleaned that all nicely. I just used some hot water and sunlight. and I just soaked it for a bit. I scrubbed it all because you just want to get all that oil or grease that might be on the fittings off before you're going to make your beer. So now what I've done is I've done water on the stove up to 79 degrees. I've added it in here, and now I'm going to put my malt in here so we can do our mash. You just want to give it a good stir, just to make sure that you've got no clumps in here. There's no sort of clumps floating around that are going to stick together, because you want to get all those sugars and proteins out of the malt as you can. So I'm just going to give it a little scummel around here, just to make sure that we get all the malt broken down. And then we're going to close up here and we're going to leave it for 1 hour to mash. Well, the great thing about being in the cooler box is we know that the temperature is going to remain pretty constant. So better than doing it on the stove with a pot where you're going to have to keep on monitoring the temperature. This should be fine for its full hour. Alright, so our mash has been going for 1 hour in the cooler box here. Smelling pretty good. Just going to give it a quick stir around. And now what we're going to do is we're going to drain this. And what I'm going to use is actually my fermenter bucket to drain this into. So because I still don't have a big enough pot, my plan is this. I'm going to drain this into the fermenter bucket. We're going to use all the sparge water through here, fill up the fermenter bucket, and then I'm going to split that in half. I'm going to boil half, cool it. And while that's busy happening, I'm going to clean the fermenter bucket. Well, I'm going to put what's in the fermenter bucket back in here. But first I'm going to clean out all the grains, make it nice and clean. And then I'll store it in here. So we do a half boil, put it into the fermenter, boil the second half, cool, put it into the fermenter, and we're good to go. So I've still got to boil twice, but at least this portion is a bit quicker. And hopefully we result in quite a nice, a better quality mash this way around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this. We're going to drain this whole cooler box into the fermenter bucket. So far it seems that the sort of filter system I made in here has worked pretty well actually. I think we're going to get some good results from this. So we're expecting to see, so we started with the 12 litres in here to do a mash. I don't know, I guess maybe 10 litres will come out because a lot has been absorbed by the grain. So let's see, luckily there's a scale on the side of this fermenter so we can see how much is in there. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to save just about 2 cups of what comes out of here, or a litre, two measuring jugs full. And I'm going to use that to what apparently is called settling the bed. So once this is all drained out, I'm going to use this just to get that bed of malt all nice and settled. And then we'll start doing the sparge very carefully. Okay, so the flow stopped, and now what we're going to do is do something called settling the grain bed apparently. So I just gently, I'm going to use this wort that I've already saved, and I'm going to just, over the back of a spoon, I'm just going to gently sort of fill this up a bit. I guess this is just to make sure that you got an even bed. So what we don't want is any sort of divots or holes from when you sparge in your grain bed. You want to keep it nice and even so you can evenly wash everything that's in here through. So I'm just going to gently do this, and then we'll start with our sparge water. I've closed the tap, done that. So for this recipe we had 12 litres of our mash water, and then we've got an additional 18 litres of sparge water, and that's at 80 degrees. So I've heated that up, and now we're going to start running that through. So I'm going to open the tap again, and then we'll start with our sparge.
So I've ended up with about 26 litres here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this in half. So I'm going to do two 13 litre boils. It's a 12 litre pot. So what I'm going to do is put 10 litres in this pot, 3 litres in the other pot, get them boiling, and as this reduces, I'll just keep on topping it up with boiling water. So let's get going. So that upgrade on my mash tun, or my new mash tun, made quite a big difference to my brew day. So it definitely cut down my time, and I think the result out of it was pretty good. I'm actually quite happy at how it turned out. If you found it useful, if you're going to make one, if you liked it, let me know in the comments. Consider giving the video a like and consider subscribing to the channel. Until next time, stay safe.